Okay, good morning and welcome to this, the 8th meeting of 2013 of the European and External Relations Committee. Can I make the usual request that mobile devices are switched off as they interfere with broadcasting? Can I let committee know that we have received apologies from Helen Eady MSP, who is attending another event today, but we have Neil Finlay here as her substitute. And before we start the meeting, can I just put on record our thanks, the committee's thanks, to Dr Ian Duncan, who has been our previous Brussels Bulletin European officer and senior clerk on the committee. Ian has gone to pursue other dreams outside the Parliament, and we wish him well. I would just like to put that on the record. For the record too, can I welcome Katie Orr, who's taken over from Dr Ian Duncan. And Katie has many, many years of experience at the European Commission, and I think we have landed very lucky with Katie, so good luck in the committee and welcome. Okay, and before we start, can I ask Neil Finlay if he's got any relevant interest to declare?
Refer you to my register of interests, Camilla.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 1, which is a decision to take business in private. And if I could seek committee's agreement to take agenda item 7 in private, which is a draft report on our inquiry.
Agreed.
Yep, okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is moving on to the Scottish Government Country Plan for China International Framework Inquiry. Over the past few months, we've been conducting our inquiry into the Scottish Government's Country Plan for China and International Framework. The inquiry is focused upon the strategy for economic engagement between Scotland and China, as set out in the China Plan, and perceived benefits that are drawn from this policy. The inquiry will also consider the potential for further strengthening of the plan and subsequent trade relations with China. In the process of the inquiry so far, the committee has visited a number of businesses in Scotland which currently engage with or receive investment from the Chinese market. This has allowed members of the committee to gain a first-hand understanding, a very relevant first-hand understanding, I would say, of our trade agreement. And we're looking forward to hearing our first oral evidence from Scottish Development International. And if I can welcome both our witnesses here today, we have Ed Payne, who is the Head of Strategy, and Julian Taylor, who is the Executive Director Strategy and Economics for Scottish Enterprise for Scottish Development International. Can I thank both of you for coming along today? And I think we're going to go straight to questions unless you've got a brief statement to make.
Happy to go straight to questions.
Yep, okay. I think our first question up is from Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, according to the Scottish Government, its strategy for engagement with China sets out the Scottish Government's ambition in developing Scotland's relationship with China over the next 5 years. The strategy is intended for all Scotland and has been developed after extensive engagement with key stakeholders, and it provides a framework for any Scottish organisation that wishes to work with China. Is that correct?
Yes, would be the short answer.
In that point, how does the government's strategy for engagement guide your work in China?
The overall strategy is a clear statement of intent, but it's a framework. It's a relatively short document, but it does set out priorities. So for Scottish Development International, which is the trade and investment arm of Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and indeed the Scottish Government, it does set a very clear set of priorities and ambition. So that in itself guides our actions, and what we've been able to do on the back of that is to undertake the direct support to help companies invest in China and indeed help Chinese companies invest in Scotland. So it's a statement of intent, very useful in fact for the relationships that are desperately important in China with Chinese government and various arms of the Chinese government, so that we can demonstrate in market that we have the commitment of the Scottish government behind us. So that in itself is an incredibly important asset. I'm not sure I'm getting to the nub of your question.
I'm coming to that. How do your funding levels compare with other national offices located in the region, and what are you able to deliver with your current funding levels?
In terms of funding, I think it can be just a little bit misleading to think of precise the investment made in market in China. So we have an important footprint of staff. We've been able to increase from 9 to 12 staff. We've moved from 2 to 3 offices. So resources in market are relatively strong. In addition to that, we work alongside a whole range of partners, which I would argue may actually without wishing to give away our trade secrets, I think we're better than our peers and our competitors in terms of, for example, relationships with CBBC, an excellent organisation with a fantastic footprint across China, but also people like our global Scots. We've got a great network of senior Scots overseas that we can tap on in terms of our resources. But I think that the important part of the iceberg is the investment that's made in Scotland. So the fact that Scottish Development International's presence in China is actually driven by the huge presence that we've got in Scotland in terms of the companies that we work with in Scotland, the relationships we have with universities and other investors in Scotland. That's where the real resources are committed. So to look for a relatively modest footprint of staff in the market is one thing, which is on a par with some of our competitors, without a shadow of a doubt. Some have more, some have less. But we've also got the huge resource to draw on, which is based back in Scotland.
What range of support does SDI provide to assist businesses looking to access the Chinese market? And are there any specific examples of a business that has received recent support? During evidence-taking sessions, we visited, for example, 2 salmon farms, and both exporting to China. One had already had its own offices in China and was doing a lot of exports. The other didn't, and seemed to be not achieving very much in that regard. So I wondered if you could give me some instances of businesses that you've helped recently.
Maybe ask Ed to draw on some of the specific examples. But again, in terms of the whole food industry, recently we took a trade mission to a major food event in China, for the first time bringing together ministerial representation, the trade bodies for the food industry, including Scottish Seafoods and Scotland Food and Drink, and a whole series of companies that are producers, to come and meet potential buyers, but not only that, to come and see their product in situ in supermarkets, for example, to come and engage with celebrity chefs. The power of social media is incredibly important in China. So if Scotland can become better known as a brand for premium products, especially in food, that's sort of more power to the elbow. So the actual specific support ranges from the softer social media side of getting engagement, right the way through to really practical help of, we will help companies prepare market research, for example, to understand the precise requirements, the product design, protection of IP, expertise that we can provide or we can procure by working with partners for companies. A whole series of practical examples there. Whilst you mentioned salmon, however, again, one of the big challenges is the production of salmon. So we need to ensure that the salmon producers are not only aware of the opportunities in China, but are engaging with authorities here to increase the productive capability in Scotland and indeed their own processing capability. So it is part of an overall package. But Ed, are there any more specifics?
Yeah, and going back to your original question, we were very much involved with Scottish Government colleagues in the development of the China Plan, particularly the trade investment element. So I think that it was very much a joined-up document, and we worked very closely with stakeholders as well in terms of doing that, particularly using the experience of our field staff in China. In terms of the support we give to help companies, I think you have to see that in terms of the overall growth support that we give to companies. So we work very closely with both Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise, very much targeted at both at an industry level, but also at an individual company level. We look at the growth aspirations of companies, and then say, how can we support that? If some of that support is about market development and exporting, then that's where SDI come in terms of providing that trade and investment expertise. And then, again, if China is a market of interest to the company, we will work with the company in terms of entering that market. A lot of the work is done, and a lot of the value that companies view is the preparedness work. So do they have a plan? Do they have a strategy? Do they understand the market? And we provide a lot of the market intelligence, again, working with our partners. So, for example, the UKTI have a very good market intelligence service. And then when a company is prepared and understands what its market is, we will then help them enter the market. So we will run missions to China. We'll help them develop their networks in China, and that's where our overseas staff can add a lot of value. A lot of it is around obviously understanding the business culture, understanding the regulatory regime as well. in our submission, we did articulate quite a few different examples of individual companies we have helped. So in terms of the food and drink sector, the work we've done with the salmon in industry, but very much with the bakery section as well. I mean, China is very interested in provenance. Scotland has a unique provenance and a world-class provenance. So the way we sell whisky into the market along with bakery products is critical. But a lot of it is also around the more technical side as well. So we help a lot of renewable companies. Secure Energy, for example, in terms of helping them access the market and establish a presence. So again, and so, sorry, that's an example. Yeah.
Well, just finally, is it all right, convener, if I just, because according to the Scottish Government, you're providing a framework for any Scottish organisation that wishes to work with China. So if a new food producer, say in Highlands and Islands somewhere, wants to engage with that framework, what is his first step?
Again, if it's a company, I mean, we had again Stag Bakeries based in Stornoway is an example of a Highlands Alliance company we have helped into China. But again, if it's a company that's new to exporting, I think what we have to look at is what their growth aspiration is and how they want to expand their markets.
So what do they do? They lift the telephone to you, or what do they do?
Yes, they can lift the telephone directly to us. They would normally be referred to us by Highlands Alliance Enterprise and Scottish Enterprise, or by Business Gateway, in terms of, because what SDI provides is the specific trade and investment expertise. Overall business growth support is provided by Scottish Enterprise, Highlands Enterprise, and Business Gateway, and they can contact all via the web or via telephone, and a lot of them, again, if their growth businesses will be account managed through those organisations. So it should be. I would hope it's relatively easy for a company to access our services, and I'd certainly like some feedback if that is not the experience.
Certainly, we test the ease of doing business with us. I think we need to be very clear, though, that just picking up the phone and saying I want to export to China, we would need to ensure that a company has really thought through the whole decision-making process. So we can have a one-to-one relationship. We can actively try and engage with companies. We can work in seminars and workshops, but a company has to have the capability to be able to export, and in all honesty, probably to somewhere else before they've thought about the China market. So sometimes we wouldn't never advise a company not to engage in a particular market, but we would make sure they've really thought through that. And in the cold light of day, sometimes the decision not to export to a particularly challenging market is actually the right decision.
But that's the point I'm making: is how do they get in touch with you? It's meant to be providing this framework organisation that, for any organisation that wants to work in China. So that they must come to you. You may decide that it's wrong for them, but it's no good saying, I don't think, that they have to go through HIE or Scottish Enterprise. Or I mean, if you're saying you're providing this framework, they must be able to get in touch with your framework.
Yeah.
So the relationship between partners is utterly seamless. So as was said in the introduction, that we are the trade and investment arm of those partners. So our staff work side by side. We're all part of the same team.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got a brief supplementary from Claire on this one. Yep.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the ministerial visits and celebrity endorsement and social media in China being vitally important. Obviously, trade missions have, long-standing sort of prevalence in terms of what we're doing. But is there something particular about the culture or the market in China that makes the ministerial and sort of celebrity part of it more important to that country?
Absolutely, and I think we'd separate the two. So government relationships generally, my sense would be, are much more important in China than probably most other markets across the world. So to have the relationship at any level in government, at a personal level, very important, and then beneath that to deeply understand the way through, for example, the regulatory environment. That's desperately important. So in terms of government relationships, it would be very hard to do a job without the strength of those relationships. More on the sort of the we could call the celebrity chef example. Really what I'm getting at there is the way business is done in most markets it's different to the way it's done in Scotland and the rest of the UK. But in China, again, particularly different. The role of social media is incredibly powerful. And I think the word Ed used was provenance. And if we can definitely punch above our weight if we were able to communicate to a mass market using modern techniques such as social media. Without being too anecdotal, I was at a dinner with a major Chinese importer of products. Whilst we were having dinner, he was tweeting about the dinner that we were having. I said, what are you tweeting about? Tweeting about having dinner with you and that great Scottish food that we're eating. I said, how many followers have you got? 400,000. So instantly hitting a market. Now, that's so much more powerful than advertisements and brochures. So that's a respected influencer being able to access a very high proportion of people. And the man was buying and selling Scottish produce. Much more powerful than traditional marketing forms.
So we've got a brief supplementary on this again from Hans-Alan. Hans-Alan has just made the comment that 400,000 followers is a wee bit short of what he's got following him on Twitter. So, Hans-Alan.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, it was just to follow up in terms of support for new companies in particular. Now, I know that we have a growing food industry in our dairy products, particularly cheese. We seem to be specializing in that and high-quality cheese. And I'm just wondering whether any of those companies have approached you, but more importantly, have you approached them with the possibility of engaging in overseas markets?
Yes, I would stand by my statement that we need to ensure that the company has the capability. We would never decide whether a company is right or not for the market. We would challenge them very strongly to make sure they have the capability to approach the market. We are being approached by more and more companies, and traditionally, obviously whiskey, but now food producers and indeed dairy produce producers. For a variety of reasons, the Chinese market is demanding more Western products, especially in dairy, because of food safety challenges that they've had. So we see that as a great market opportunity. We're proactively trying to prospect for companies who are interested in marketing a smart exporter program to try and widen the net that we've got. And then just going back to that trade mission which I mentioned, which involved the minister, that was a chance to bring together aspiring exporters to work alongside existing exporters, where there's much more peer-to-peer learning, so the dairy manufacturers who are new to the market can learn alongside the biscuit manufacturers who are quite experienced.
Could you actually give me an example of a company that you have assisted?
So
to either participate, but more importantly, develop to the level where you would feel them able to participate?
Yeah, I mean, certainly what we've been working with is very closely with Scotland Food and Drink, who have been really a key partner in this, and that's trying to get the whole in industry engagement. And as part of that, they did publish the Asia Food and Drink Plan. Graham's Dairy in particular have actually looked at value-added milk products into the Chinese market, and are very positive about the opportunities there. On that other point, I mean, one key is that we actually, at the beginning of January, a member of our local staff in China actually came to Scotland for 6 weeks, and she very much toured the country, talking to particularly food and drink businesses. A big event in Inverness, for example, talking to food and drink businesses, and that's really getting the reality of what it's like to do business in China. She was a native of China, so can really give that sense and answer the question. So it was very much bringing China to Scotland, particularly to smaller businesses who probably don't have the resources to travel over to China all the time. So even just to understand the market a bit better, to understand if it is fit for them as such. And a part of that was, again, looking at people to go to the HOFEX food and drink exhibition in Hong Kong.
More examples would be Baxter's, Mackay's. I mean, there's a whole list of companies, and we'd be more than happy to share some of that. And again, we need to bear in mind commercial confidentiality. Some companies are just approaching the market.
Okay, thanks very much. You've mentioned quite a lot about the food and drink industry, and I know there's 4 priority areas: food and drink, energy, financial services, ICT, creative industries and life sciences all lumped together. Can you maybe give us a wee insight into why these 4 priorities were chosen?
Yeah. So again, market opportunity is one of the main drivers. We're seeing a a change in the structure of the Chinese economy. We're seeing an emergent middle class, a significant proportion of the population with more disposable income. So hence food and drink. The structure of the Chinese economy is changing. They will consume a significant proportion of the world's global energy production. So where we have competitive advantage, genuinely where Scotland is amongst the best in the world, in a market opportunity that is growing really rapidly, we're helping to bridge the gap. And then specifically in things like life sciences, where we have really, again, specialist, niche, world-class opportunities, playing into market opportunities that are growing and going to be very significant. So like the rest of the world, China will, its disease profile will change, the importance of diabetes and Scotland's expertise in understanding and treating diabetes. So we're seeing a sort of a win-win opportunity there. Care for a growingly, becoming ever-increasingly elderly population without, because of the one-child policy, without a population to support that. These are issues faced in the West, issues faced in China, and opportunities for Scotland to exploit. So the principle is market opportunity based against our competitive advantage, and that's where we've distilled down. We can't be all things to all people, so we've been very niche in our approach.
Just giving a bit more detail on that, if you look at the Chinese 12th five-year plan, the priorities within that, in terms of where they want to focus, is on energy, is on biotechnology, is on new IT, and that's very areas where we have competitive strength in Scotland. So it's kind of matching the demand from China with the opportunity in Scotland. We work very closely with the industry leadership groups in Scotland, and it's they that have prioritised China as a future market. And again, if you look at even the company surveys in terms of the Global Connection Survey, where they look at future market, China is now ranked the #1 new market for companies, and it has done for the last two years. So it's that growing demand we're seeing from industry in Scotland, matched with the opportunity that China affords.
Okay, I think Willie Coffey is in the next question. You're going to explore that a bit more.
Thanks very much, Convener. Mr Payne, you kind of took the next question I had in mind for you there, but nevertheless it's very, very important. It was to ask about how we match up Scotland's strengths in these particular sectors that you've highlighted there in terms of what the Chinese needs and requirement are, and you've given us some indication of that. Scotland can certainly offer world-class, I think, standard products and services to the Chinese market, but one that I didn't see there was the leisure and tourism side of industry. I mean, most of these services will give things, goods and services, to a Chinese market, but what are we doing to try to encourage our Chinese friends to come to Scotland? And I notice in some of the paperwork, Convener, the mention of direct air routes to Scotland don't exist at the moment. Is there any thinking going on to offer the Chinese market some access to Scotland's really world-class leisure and tourism facilities and so on, and how would we achieve that?
Just to respond, Visit Scotland, the government's agency for tourism promotion, have developed their thoughts on a world market scale, and from their evidence, there is a market of nearer neighbours and people with a much stronger affinity to Scotland through Commonwealth and North American countries. There is an awareness of the importance of emerging markets within Visit Scotland. So there's some recognition of the opportunity. I think it also ties together with the premium offering that I was referring to. So Scotland can stand for not only the high quality food product, but the textiles product, the golf product. You can come and see and enjoy the whole experience back in Scotland, where these fine foods were made, and you can have a great experience there. Very specifically on direct air routes, we're working actively with Transport Scotland, with Visit Scotland and the Scottish Government to try and pursue the prize of a direct air route from Scotland to mainland China. We represented for the first time ever ourselves collectively with the Scottish airports at the main it's a speed dating exercise that's held once a year amongst the airline industry in the Middle East last year. So there was a Scotland stand, and we were approaching and doing some background work with the airlines that do fly directly to China. So we're absolutely on the case, but I wouldn't underestimate how competitive that market is. However, through one change, Scotland is reasonably well connected to China. So one change of flight from Edinburgh Airport, and there are 400 daily flights into China. So if you can go... Sorry, weekly, daily, weekly flights. So to change through Schiphol, through London, through through Copenhagen, you can get to China relatively easy. And from Glasgow, the Emirates flight is one change back into the market. Now, that's not ideal, and we would like a direct flight, made no bones about it. But the connectivity is reasonable to that extent.
What about Scotland, the brand, the culture and the leisure identity? Is it well understood in China, and is it valued in China? Is there a job of work for us to do there to raise the awareness of Scotland's potential as a destination for the Chinese market to come to?
I think that overall promotion of Scotland is really critical, and it's how the alignment of the China plan is really critical in terms of showing how that all integrates in terms of the overall promotion of Scotland. So when we are doing missions out to China, very much focus on the cultural aspects as well. I think the further you get from Scotland, the less well known Scotland is. So it's a continual process. So if you look at the US market compared to China, we're not as visible, and therefore there is a significant promotion job to do. But in terms of some niches, Elmwood College has been in China for a long time. Most of the greenkeepers in China are trained through Elmwood College. So golf is is well known in China. So it is, I think, looking at the niche opportunities that Scotland has to offer in terms of Chinese visitor. The other thing I think which is key is the in terms of that agenda is the number of Chinese students we have here who then have an affinity to Scotland, and how we keep that affinity with them when they go back to Scotland. And we work closely with the universities in terms of their alumni and putting a business edge to some of the events that they run.
We could certainly do more. I think it'd be fair to say we punch above our weight, however, and it's things like world-renowned academics that we can get into the Chinese market. They will draw a crowd, and when we can do that, we'll bring alongside them, for example, in life sciences, embryonic life sciences companies. And there is, and we should take this seriously, the symbolism of the pandas being in Edinburgh Zoo. That's a sign of the strength of a relationship and the fact that Scotland is taken seriously, because not every country would be awarded that privilege.
Is there going to be a Scottish panda?
Hopefully.
Thanks for that.
Okay, thanks very much. Neil Finlay.
You mentioned food and things like whisky. What other types of products and services are we seeing being exported? What particular things?
One thing we haven't spoken on, and I know you'll receive evidence from Scottish Financial Enterprise, is some of the financial services companies that are well established, the Aberdeen Asset Management, Martin Curry, etc. So that's, again, another niche opportunity for Scotland's expertise to respond to the changing dynamic, a growing wealthy population. Probably haven't touched on the engineering sector, so companies like Weir Group, Clyde Group, etc., Agreco, again, niche specialist opportunities. And there are, whilst the need to focus on certain markets is important, there are a number of other companies who have been able to take the bull by the horns. The Scottish Leather Group, Bridge of Weir Leather in Renfrewshire, have the sophistication of a wholly owned enterprise in China. Now, they employ 600 people in total in Scotland, but are able to produce leather products that are fitted to the cars of Volvo and others that are part of the new production facilities in China. So there are also one or two examples of just great Scottish companies who have stolen the march on the competition and are operating in the market. And that's quite a sophisticated thing to do, and hats off to companies like that.
Yeah, I think there's two kind of market segments that we play into. One is that satisfying the growing consumer demand and the middle class within China, and that's very much about the provenance of Scotland. And again, the food and drink examples and the whisky examples is example of that. The other is the providing the technology and products. So new products, particularly in the oil and gas, renewable energy, life sciences and advanced engineering. If you actually look at the breakdown in terms of the industry, in terms of Global Connection Survey, it's pretty widespread, the types of exports to China, and a lot of it is around that technology side. Life sciences in particular in terms of the research excellence that Scotland has, and how that can be accessed by China is key, I think, as part of that.
I'll be cautious when I say this, but are our banks involved in China?
I'm not. There's a relationship between Bank of China and Barclays, but so that's China to the UK. I'm not aware of the specific relationships. I think
Cautious of our banks given recent history.
I think it's asset management is a key area. How we use the Scottish expertise to actually help China manage its assets.
The figures we have here show that the European average share of exports to China has increased over recent years, but Scotland's share has decreased. Would you care to comment on that?
These are, again, I need to understand those figures a bit better.
Figures have here the share of Scotland, Scotland's share of exports to China in relation to the European OECD average. So it says 2008, European average is 7.5, goes up to 8.9 by 2010. Scotland's share from 2008, 2.1, goes down to 1.3 in 2010 and has come back to 1.7.
I mean, I think we're I'm not quite sure on the OECD average, but I think what we're seeing in terms of global connection survey, there's a bit of variability within the data. What we have seen, I think, over the last 10 years is, if you look at the data kind of year on year, the general trend is kind of exports have gone up from around 200 million a year to 400 million a year. So we've doubled our exports into the Chinese market. I think we need to look at our competitors, though, and understand what they're doing compared to us in terms of what industries in particular are actually the Chinese are actually demanding. And I think that is an area of relative performance we need to look at further.
If you go back enough, of course you're going to see an increase. You know, you'd be pretty duff if you didn't. But in recent years, you know, the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a decrease. That's the problem, isn't it?
The most recent data from HMRC, which looks at tradable goods, and that's the 2012 statistics. It shows that Scotland's exports overall have been fairly flat, but that's mainly due to a decline in Europe, but about 5% increase to the rest of the world, and a 20% increase to China. And China was a country that had the biggest value increase of 88 million. So I think we are seeing exports increase to China, but I think it is a long-term game. If you are going into that market, you have to establish a presence and then grow it.
Just one other, not directly related, but important nonetheless, is the last couple of weeks we saw the situation in Bangladesh with the catastrophe that happened there. This is more probably to do with imports from China. Are companies raising issues and concerns about conditions of working people and who are producing products that are coming into Scotland in light of what we know what happened in Bangladesh, or is it just the financial element, the bottom line, that is priority for them?
It's not something we've necessarily seen, but I certainly know that the companies that I've worked with who are trading in Scotland care as much about the working conditions in overseas plants as they do here. So I'm not seeing any evidence of a rising concern.
The issue is, you know, a number of companies, and indeed the companies who were involved in production in that facility, I'm sure, said exactly the same thing. You know, I'm just wondering how robust some companies are in ensuring that products are being produced in an ethical manner.
I've no evidence to draw on to respond to that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much. Rod Campbell.
Morning, gentlemen. I'm pleased to hear the reference to Elmwood, which is in my constituency, and to the good work it's doing in training greenkeepers. But just moving on slightly from what Neil Finlay was saying, is the relatively limited number of firms exporting to China, is that an indication, in your view, of a lack of interest on the part of Scottish businesses?
I think what we're seeing is, across the business base, Scotland would benefit from more companies in more sectors exporting to more markets. We need to be exporting more. What we're seeing is, when we talk to companies, we're seeing China rise up the ranking or the list of countries that they would be interested in. So we're getting much more awareness now of China as a market. We need more, but at least the trend is in the right direction.
Okay, and how do we work to increase that pool? We had a written submission from a technology company, Olympus, which suggested, whilst they were very pleased with the financial assistance they got from Scottish Enterprise, the basics seemed to indicate the intelligence that they obtained was their own, and what they would really like would be help to provide specific guidance on lists of reputable representatives, agents, distributors, to commercially enable them in the early stages. So possibly something beyond what you're currently doing.
We can. We do try and provide that. But again, we can only use our best sources. So I think due diligence is always for the company to assess and whatever the market going in. But we will try to provide as much support to that as possible. I think, particularly looking at China, it is an incredibly competitive market. So to go to China, you have to be an incredibly competitive business. So it is about looking at those world-class companies within Scotland, though those that are competitive. It is mainly for companies that have already relatively experienced in terms of they've already exporting into Europe, for example, and it's the next step for them. So I think it is about their overall competitiveness and not just their export experience. But in terms of export experience, I think one of the challenges is that China is culturally very different, and therefore the support needed is more, and the market failures that companies experience are more. So therefore, we need to provide that. And we also, I think, one of the things is provide that peer-to-peer support that the company mentioned. So like, for example, using Global Scots so people get the experience, using our staff coming back to Scotland to talk to companies about the experience in China, using the likes of CBBC to help that as well. And also the business organisations. I was with the CBI on Tuesday at one of their business meetings, and Gavin Hewitt from the Scotch Whisky Association was talking about the experience in the emerging markets and some of the kind of particular challenges of those markets, and sharing that with the wider business community. So I think there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning that can help.
Olympus suggested, I think, that they don't believe that China is a single unified market. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah. I think Frank Boylan, director out there at the moment, spoke in the Hollywood magazine in January saying he was in Beijing and it was -2. He then flew 5 hours to Shenzhen and it was 28 degrees. And the products sold there are going to be different because of that, for example.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning again. It's really to ask you about whether or not you've done any benchmarking against the work that other countries are doing in terms of how they deliver support to companies. We were very taken by the evidence from the Scottish Salmon Company, who said that actually the New Zealand website was where they had got most of their information about doing it. So have you done sort of any benchmarking? Are you looking at other ways of delivering the support at the moment?
Yes, but probably not enough. One of the things I maybe would have said if I'd made opening remarks is that whilst I'm personally responsible now for the strategy and economic works at Scottish Enterprise, in the summer I'll be taking over responsibility for our Asia Pacific team and will be based in Shanghai myself. And what I want to bring alongside the great operational experience that we've got in field is more of a strategy perspective, and benchmarking against peers I think will be critical amongst that. And we will ruthlessly learn from our competitors, absolutely.
Very much, Claire. Billy Coffey.
Thanks, Convener. I was wanting to ask about tariff barriers and issues like that, and what our experience, our Scottish experience is of that. Are they a particular problem? Are they shared with colleagues and partners in the European Union, perhaps? Do we all face the same issues, or does Scotland suffer particularly? And what are we trying to do to break down those barriers?
Obviously, the clerk highlighted a particular challenge that one company you went to see. Trade policy in terms of trade barriers is governed through so the UK government working with Europe, and it's mainly negotiated through Europe. I think the key thing is to understand what the challenge is. It's a very technical issue. So we've gone back to UKTI, that have gone to BIS, who are now going to Beijing to figure out that particular example. But I think it is an area that we need to be aware of. It's an area that we need to influence early on. So if we know there's particular trade barriers, then we can work with industry associations. And again, I think the Scotch Whisky Association is particularly good at this in terms of finding these out early. So it is an area where I think, particularly China now being part of the WTO, I think we need to use the organisations available to us to try and influence and with like-minded countries.
Would you say we're particularly disadvantaged, or?
No, I think it's a general. I don't think Scotland is particularly disadvantaged.
Okay, yeah. And final question in this round of questions from Jamie.
Yes, thank you very much. Evidence from Philip Morgan, the first Secretary for Scottish Affairs in the British Embassy in Beijing between 2010 and October 2012, states that the impact of a political visit to China and the personal relationships that are developed at a political level cannot be underestimated, but is enough thought being given to how each visit will further the delivery of the China plan in the content and itinerary of a ministerial visit or its timing and cost. And my question on top of that is, what role the SDI offices in China play in planning and running a Scottish Government ministerial visit to China?
So the first part of the question is we actively work with government colleagues to ensure there's a forward programme of ministerial visits that can genuinely support trade and investment opportunities alongside cultural opportunities. So we mentioned the fact that Richard Lockhead was accompanying the food and drink trade mission to Shanghai at the end of last year as a prime example of the way we've got alignment with that ministerial visit alongside business interests. SDI staff in field will make sure that the ministerial visit is supporting ongoing discussions and negotiations, for example, with potential inward investors, is ensuring that the ministerial connection or political connection can be made to help Scottish companies gain access at the highest possible level, and it is an opportunity to raise particular issues, opportunities and concerns, for example, to seek guidance in recruiting local staff as one specific example. So very close cooperation both on the planning of visits and the delivery, the day-to-day delivery.
So you're happy that ministerial visits are, on the whole, value for money?
Absolutely.
Ministers can open doors that our staff can't, in China particularly.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that completes our questions for today. The final item that you mentioned earlier would be a list of distributors and companies, and also maybe if you could write to the committee and give us a wee insight in how accessible that is to these companies, that list. I know that you say there's some confidentiality there as well, but it'd be quite interesting to get that up-to-date information for the committee. And can I thank you both for your evidence today. I know it was a bit of a sprint rather than a marathon, but I think we've managed to glean a lot of decent information, and if we need anything else, we'll come back to you. Okay, thank you very much. Can I briefly suspend the meeting to allow us to get into our places for the round table? Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to the European External Relations Committee. Our next agenda item is our round table, which I'm hoping for quite a free-flow discussion this morning. We've got lots of expertise and interests around the table. If you can sort of channel your comments through the chair, it means we can maybe, you know, have a bit of structure. But as I say, I'm quite happy to have a bit of a free flow, and hopefully members will come back and ask questions and pick up points as we go along. I think we will just move on to inviting everyone round the table to introduce themselves. So I'm the convener, Christina McKelvey, MSP.
Assalamu alaikum, Vice Convener.
Owen Kelly, I'm Chief Executive of Scottish Financial Enterprise. We're the representative body for Scotland's financial services industry.
I'm Roderick Campbell, MSP for North East 5.
Angus Tulloch, I'm a fund manager based in Edinburgh.
Like Coffey, MSP for Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley.
Dennis Taylor, I run a consultancy called The Hidden Office.
Claire Adamson, Central Scotland MSP.
James Anderson, I'm a partner at Baillie Gifford Fund Managers.
James Brodie, I'm the Scotland manager at the China Britain Business Council.
Jamie McGregor, MSP Highlands and Islands Region.
Giles Blackburn, I'm a director at China Britain Business Council.
Neil Finlay, MSP for Lothians, and I'm a substitute for Helen Eadie.
I think we have official report on our clerk. Thank you very much. If I just open the discussions quickly, asking all the stakeholders around the table about their engagement with the China plan and whether it works and what it does to assist or doesn't assist with your engagement with China. Perhaps just to throw that question out and catch someone.
Yeah, I'm closest to you, Madam Chairman. So Scottish Financial Enterprise, as I say, we represent the financial services industry, and I suppose for us the China plan, the Scottish Government's China plan is one component in a larger picture. I mean, mention has already been made. I was listening to earlier evidence of China British Business Council, UKTI, the embassy in Beijing, the various consul generals in China and so on. I mean, there's a range of government activities, UK level, Scottish level, EU level. The EU Chamber of Commerce in Beijing is very, very well respected as well. So we see it as a useful and practical contribution to what is, in many ways, a broader-based effort. I suppose, just very quickly to summarise our particular interests in China, in recent years we've been very much seeking to promote Scottish asset managers into the China market. The reason for that, I think the concept can be reasonably easily expressed, although we have some far more expert people than me with us this morning on how that actually works. But the essential idea, if you like, is that China at the moment has an awful lot of money, of wealth, particularly in the sovereign wealth funds, but in life companies and elsewhere. And we in Scotland have internationally recognised expertise in investing worldwide and in managing those funds. So that's, you know, in a nutshell, that's the proposition. We're supported in making that proposition not only by Scottish ministers, but also by the Lord Mayor of London and various other actors on the scene. But that's really the core story that we try to promote in China, and all of our efforts and collaborations with SDI and others in recent years have been pretty much focused on that. Standard Life is certainly, I think, the front runner in terms of Scottish-based companies in terms of what you might call a retail-facing financial services. They have a joint venture, Hung An Standard Life, which is based in Tianjin in China. That's been running a number of years. It's been through some changes, but it's doing quite well. RBS have a joint venture as well on the securities side. So I suppose my key point is that for us the focus is very much in promoting our asset management capabilities, which we see not only in China but more widely as, you know, our strongest international suit.
I guess
we have no direct input into the plan. We manage about $20 billion US through our offices here in Edinburgh, Hong Kong, and Singapore, which is mainly invested in Taiwan and Hong Kong rather than China, but most of the companies would be very heavily involved in China. So we have our own networks in China, and the relevance of the plan I find it personally very interesting, but to what we do is very limited.
Okay, yeah. A little bit about my background. I suppose the most important bit, most relevant bit for the committee is I'm a former director of Scottish Development International. I've had quite an extensive private and public sector experience over too many years, unfortunately. And most recently, I've set up my own business consultancy, the Hidden Office, which specialises in helping companies improve their business performance and export performance in particular. And my interest in this plan has been really a concern that there's a lot of discussions, a lot of talk about China. In fact, successive governments seem to have a love affair with China. It seems to be a very fashionable place to go. And yet, when we actually look at the results, and I heard this morning quite a lot of eloquent discussions about the opportunities in China, and they're all correct in terms of opportunities, but at the end of the day, when it's all done and the ones look at the results, our actual performance with China over the last few years has been abysmal. And it concerns me there isn't enough discussion about why the performance is actually deteriorating. And if you take into account currency levels, it's collapsing, actually, the exports to China. If you take into account the exchange rates between pound. And my concern at that is, I have an opinion about what the reasons for that are, but I'm concerned that the resources that Scotland is putting into China could actually be better directed at other markets where we would get a better return on that investment, and markets closer to home where it's much easier and lower risk for our businesses to trade. China is extremely high risk in every way you look at it. Now, it absolutely is an opportunity in China, and I think Scotland absolutely has to be figuring China highly in terms of developing relationships with it. But I think that should be at a high level, and what we do with our SMEs in particular is a very different kettle of fish. But my concern, above all, is the performance. It's going nowhere, and it surprises me that that's the elephant in the room that we're really not talking about. And by the way, I did produce some data that hopefully you've had a chance to look at. That, you know, it's not my data; it's actually Scottish Government data and the HMRC data that actually demonstrates that.
Thank you very much. Want to contribute? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we manage about, according to the vagaries of the market, which are very vagaries, as Owen will know, $150 billion overall. And I suppose we have about 10% of that would be invested directly in China, one way or the other. So it's quite substantial from that direction. Equally, we see a lot of how different companies in different parts of the world are approaching the Chinese market, who does well and the like, in response to some of the former critiques. You know, it is very, very obvious to us that the progress that, say, a group of German companies have made in China completely outweighs anything that's been accomplished outside, maybe very specific to those industries, which is something which I think does feed into what's going on, because more and more what we hear from industrialists throughout the world is that, in a sense, China is going to do most of this themselves. And if you are not in China now for 20, 25 years and made yourself part of the system, it will be very difficult from here onwards to make yourself part of the system unless you've got some special attributes. And we can all take examples from salmon to fund management onwards. We do have an office in Shanghai, which is very much part of a long-run belief that we have to establish connections. You know, for us, we've been investing in America for over 100 years. As we all know, there are connections as well. You understand what's going on, you understand what they like. We probably have got, I think Agnes would agree, a degree of competitive advantage relative to British or overseas institutions that aren't Scottish in that sense. So we want to try and establish a bit the same in China. I would observe that I do think that a feeling of comfort with Scotland is important in that, which is a very informal part of your plans, I suspect, but nonetheless important from that. I think that the notion that we are longer term than most people in London or New York makes a difference as fund managers. That's not to say that some of their investing institutions aren't extremely impatient, but the companies become confident in you and you can have great relations with you, and that does eventually through to respect from those institutions. Structurally, we spend an awful lot of time thinking about it, so I would be on a different side from Dennis to this. I mean, we do think that 15 years ahead, that it's likely to be a very important and large market to us. We think we're just starting to penetrate it. We are patient about it, but to us, this is every bit as much an opportunity as America was 20 or 30 years ago. So it's very high up our priority list.
Okay, James Brodie.
I just joined CBBC last year after having spent the last 6 years in country and based in Beijing. And I would say that there is a lot of dynamism out there. There's a lot of real opportunity, and there's a lot of need to establish the relationships, as Mr. Anderson's just suggested early on in that process. I think where the plan can play a role in that is that it does show that Scottish companies have the backing of their government. There was reference earlier on to the importance of government relations in China, and I think, albeit a framework, I think it does play a certain role. There's perhaps slightly more that could be done on the how we actually go about implementing some of the ideas and the priorities that it lays down, and that's where I'd hope CBBC are able to add some value in conjunction with SDI in market and indeed at this end. And I think there is more awareness that needs to be done in Scotland to the difficulties that Mr. Taylor refers to, that it isn't perhaps the market for everyone. I think there's a lack of awareness. Everyone sees the opportunity and talks about that, but doesn't see the real difficulties always.
Thanks very much. Is it Giles? Yes, Blackburn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps it might be useful to just add a bit as to where China Britain Business Council is coming from on this. We're a trade promotion and support organisation. We have a footprint here in the UK, including our Scotland's offices in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, and our head office in London. And we have 13 offices in China. So a broad network that can add to particularly in China, that can add to the footprint that SDI has developed out there and can be leveraged and used. I myself, where I'm coming from, is that I opened CBBC's office in Glasgow in 1994 and worked with them throughout the 90s before working at Abertay University in Dundee, where I delivered a Scottish, a Chinese studies program there for a number of years before locating to England. And nowadays I have a supervisory role over my colleagues in Scotland. A general point about the plan is that we welcome the opportunity to take a collective breath about what we're doing with China, because China keeps on taking step changes. Its priorities and challenges are changing. We've had to change our priorities at CBBC to look at the Chinese consumer, outbound investment, how they're making cities more livable, aging population, and that kind of thing. So taking a collective breath and reorienting ourselves is really important. But where the nitty-gritty is, because nobody disputes these opportunities for Scottish companies, is how to get more companies in. And I can't disagree with a colleague, with others that say perhaps there's not enough Scottish companies making, kind of getting into the market. So our point at CBBC, like James has just said, is about the hows. In other words, how can we make Scottish companies more prepared for the challenges that they're going to face when they enter the market? And how can we feed the footprint that we have in China, the SDI offices, the CBBC offices, with a better quality of company that has a better chance of succeeding? So in our view, a bit more work has to be done on the ground here to bring up the level of expectations, or at least manage the expectations and up the knowledge of the Scottish companies before they set foot and use the growing network that we collectively have.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to open questions, Sinzala.
Yes, I was wondering, does the strategy have the necessary funding to deliver the objectives, and if so, if there are additional opportunities that make themselves available, how would we cope with the funding for that?
Well, maybe I could venture a comment on that. Not particularly, because as I said earlier, the plan is, as I say, for us a component in a wider picture. I've spent a lot of time with colleagues, though, in SDI in China, and also was involved in an earlier life with setting up the UK, the Scottish Government's representation in China. I actually think it probably is as resourced as it needs to be honest. And the reason I say that is that there's an awful lot of effort going into this stuff, and I think it's probably important to see how the plan fits into the wider effort at EU level, at UK level. As I say, City of London Lord Mayor in our industry, he's again a valuable door opener, just as the First Minister or Mr. Swinney, if he's in China, is valuable as well. I think there is, but I'm interested in what Dennis was saying. It is a difficult business environment. It is a risky business environment. So I think it's probably sensible to keep a clear view of where the China plan and the work of the Scottish Government and Scottish authorities fits into the wider picture. And CBBC is a very, very good example. My experience of CBBC people working in China is that they really are amazingly knowledgeable and experienced, and that's a resource that is there and ready, just waiting to be drawn on. And I'm really not talking specifically about financial services here. This is perhaps companies looking at other kinds of businesses. So I suppose, in answer to your direct question, are resources sufficient? I would suggest that they probably are, as long as we keep a clear view of where the numerous other resources are as well.
So you both nodding your head. I wonder if you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, if I can add to that. I'm not knowledgeable about the breadth of resource available. What I do know is that there are other things out there to leverage. Collectively with the CBBC office network. That apart from being in the well-populated centres of Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen, we have an office network in the interior of China as well as some provincial capitals. We are keen to have that network leveraged and provide, therefore, more opportunities for Scottish companies. So we're very keen on that.
Did you want to come in on a point, Angus? Yeah.
I think, and it's been emphasised a number of things, that the personal relationships are terribly important, and government relationships are important as well. And I think it's just getting a few very high quality people rather than trying to sort of cover the whole of China. I'm not sure I would, three or four offices, maybe one in the west rather than three in the east might be a good thing. But it's have really good people running them who are well connected into networks like that and Global Scots and so on.
Just to add a comment to what reinforces what Angus says. One of the individuals, I hope it's okay to mention, of course, because he is the UK's champion for financial services in China, a chap called Sir David Brewer, former Lord Mayor. I think he's a very good example, actually, of what Angus is, because he's incredibly well connected, to the new Chinese leadership as well as the previous one. And he's a very valuable source of contacts and guidance on how to navigate, as the point's already been made. But China is a market where government party, is very important to be able to tap into. And somebody like Sir David, I think, I agree with Angus. I think it's those kind of relationships which are really valuable.
Certainly.
I'm a bit wary in some ways of, at least in financial services, this notion that it is as different, as high risk as people make out. To be quite honest, when we're talking, as we increasingly do, to the major Chinese sovereign wealth or related funds, they will ask you exactly the same questions as their equivalents elsewhere in the world, and their equivalents particularly in North America. And that is not accidental. They're by and large modeled themselves on these people, which is both good and bad. I therefore think that really you should be asking the question of all us, can we compete at this? Are we good enough to do it? And, we welcome and respect the support that you can give us and the notion that Scotland is taking China seriously. But, I think our efforts will stand or fall principally on our abilities to meet the top international standards in this, and those will increasingly apply in China in investment management and the like, just as they apply elsewhere in the world.
Nicely to the next question I wanted to ask, and that was that do agencies such as SDI make available the support necessary to assist businesses in their efforts to trade in China, and if you can give some examples?
Did you want in on this previous point, Dennis?
About the financial support? I think I've made clear my overall views about the focus in China, but given that we have to be in China and we have to invest, I think the important thing is not how much we invest, but how we invest. So I think to pick up on Owen and Angus's point, it's, are we focused enough? Have we spread this, whatever amount of money that we're investing in China, if we spread it too far, we won't get anywhere. I think it's very important to be very focused. There's also, I think I have a slight concern that the plan is getting both the credit and the blame for the financial performance. And this seems to be rather peculiar. Scottish business has got nothing to do with it. And so if we put more money into the plan and it grows, exports grow, then that was us, that was the plan. Majority of businesses and the majority of businesses that are trading in China are getting on with it on their own. Really, so we've got to be very careful about making this direct connection between government investment and exports, whether they go up or down. And admittedly, I'm critical that they're not going up. But I don't necessarily believe that that's necessarily the government's plan's fault. So I think I've got a problem with the question, actually. If that makes sense. I think we have to be cautious. There isn't necessarily that direct relationship, and we should be giving businesses much more credit. That if we just give businesses the freedom to get on with it, they'll do it themselves, wherever that is in the world.
I think the aspiration that we and the Scottish Parliament have is that how do we assist that process? Because you and I both are aware in that part of the world, politics plays a very big role, and assurances and trust plays a very big role. And therefore, I think us wanting to be in a position to support businesses is important. And this is why your advice and comments are helpful, because it means that we can then sharpen and focus our energies in the right direction.
I think Angus wanted to come in next, and then I've got a supplementary from Jamie in your sales factory. Okay.
I've personal sort of be my bonnet, but I think air links, a direct air link from Beijing to Glasgow, Edinburgh would make a huge difference in the whole perception of China, of Scotland as a base. And if I was looking for real focus, I would wonder whether we couldn't sort of try and hone in on becoming the European headquarter of major China corporations. And it's not my idea. I think it was Ben Thompson that suggested that, when you arrive in a Scottish airport, you could have, welcome to Scotland, and you could have it in Chinese characters as well, so people really feel welcome, and we could really sort of focus in on that.
Okay, I've got Jamie coming in on a supplementary, and then Mr Blackburn after him. Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. Mr Brodie said that we must have more awareness of the pitfalls of doing business with China. And also I noticed that Mr. Tulloch is on record that he stated that he advises caution in his approach to engagements with the Chinese market. I just wondered if you could elaborate on the pitfalls a bit. What the pitfalls are.
I have a chart, if anyone wants to see it, of the Chinese stock market. I mean, and just showing that a good economy is not a good stock market. It's been the worst place to invest in Asia, I think, over the last 20 years. So from the stock market point of view, for various reasons, it's not been a great place to invest. You're much better actually investing in Hong Kong companies and Taiwanese companies that have interests in China than in China itself. And the reason for that is that it's not the most transparent of places. Most businesses are fairly recent. The way some people garnered their original assets is still questionable. Corporate governance, it's improving, and supervision's improving the whole time, but it's a long way to go. And it's a difficult place, but that means that there are greater opportunities if you can find the right partner in China, and if you can I think if you can transfer skills to that partner, so it's a real joint venture. I think you can do terribly well in China, and we've found that it can be a very profitable place to invest.
I think managing relationships with business partners in China is perhaps takes a different format than in the UK. You need to be more aware of the requirement to go to market on a regular basis, to have regular contact. It's a less mature market depending on what sector you're working in. So I think there are more uncertainties perhaps. Angus just referred to the lack of transparency, which again can be difficult in a business environment. You don't always know what's going on, so it's important to have contacts on the ground close to your partners to feed into that. So I think it's just about making Scottish companies more aware of these issues. It's not to say that business isn't possible, on the contrary. It's just that they do need to have a network in place or have access to those networks.
Okay, Mr. Blackburn, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, please. It kind of follows on from these remarks, but also in addition to the question. I mean, about the challenge for trade support with China, where we could be adding value. And one of my recent observations is to sum up the challenge of Scottish companies, of British companies going, the main challenge is visibility. There are lots of newcomers going to China. In the meantime, the domestic competition is strong. The companies who are already there are also strong. So any newcomer going to China has to take quite a considerable time to build up its visibility and credibility in front of Chinese customers. And I guess we have to look about how we can help assist companies to increase their visibility. From some of the previous evidence, it's quite clear that some companies who have offices in China are doing more business than those companies who don't. And when you think about it, that's obvious. But how can we move a company from not having an office to learning about the market to getting an office? What sort of mechanisms can we use to build their confidence up about the market so that they will set something up? There are such schemes out there that maybe could be considered. There's forms of business incubation and soft landing. I mean, China-Britain Business Council itself has one of these schemes. But they can let the company take a breath, learn about the market, increase their visibility, prove the market internally to themselves, to their board, before stepping out, making their own footprint. But yeah, my main point is trying to raise to the challenge about making our companies more visible out there and give them greater prospect. And I think that the mixture of SDI's network and CBBC's network, the links to government, can all help in this. But sometimes the company needs practical help. It needs visibility in market.
exactly the point I was trying to make, and I was hoping that someone could offer an example, because I think one of the best opportunities we could possibly have is our own branding, because if we're competing in China and mainland, branding is going to be a very important element of that, and I'm just wondering how successful we have been in doing that.
Well, I suppose it's worth remembering in that context that one of the most senior members of the Chinese government was in London last year, and they made quite trenchant comments about how the UK was sort of falling behind France and Italy in terms of branding, you know, and perception. And they were talking about consumer products, brand names we could all think of, and they were encouraging the UK to get better at promoting the brand and so on. Having said that, it's and I suppose I declare a certain interest in that. I first spent time in China a long time ago now, and it is the case, I think, and it's kind of built into the language, and it's not, I hope, a controversial thing to say, that there is a much greater awareness of the UK than there is Scotland, and that's not a surprise. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise, because seen from China, Scotland is, a part of Europe, and therefore I think that there are interesting niche opportunities, as I think SDI have already sort of elaborated, to promote a Scottish brand. And whisky is clearly the most obvious. I'd like to think fund management is one as well, but whisky is certainly one of the most obvious opportunities there. Beyond that, how difficult would it be, I suppose one might ask, to create a brand for a country from the situation we're in at the moment? I personally feel that's a very, very large challenge, and again, I suppose I think within the market, we should take advantage of the shoulders we can stand on, and in many cases, that's seen from China. It's Europe. That's the thing that people think of.
Campbell.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Mr. Brodie's point about the importance of trying to get people in Scotland aware of the importance of managing relations, but how does that fit into the plan itself? And is managing relations not quite a long-term and difficult thing to actually assess?
A lot of aspects of working with China are long-term. I think that's part and parcel of building relationships in China, is that they do tend to be long-term. So in terms of how the plan can play a role in that, I think it's more, as I say, the plan itself I don't think should be confused with what the likes of SDI are doing on the ground. I mean, the plan has come out of government, and it's a framework for perhaps what SDI are then implementing on the ground, and other organisations for that matter. But I think it should be part and parcel of the market awareness that SDI are carrying out, and the likes of CBBC as well. It's just another aspect to learning how to do business in China, I think.
The plan has obviously got short-term, in relative terms, targets. That's the difficulty.
Yes, I suppose it's not something that's very measurable, how well equipped a company is to know how to manage relationships in China, if that's true.
Moving on to Jamie McGregor's question, I think leads in quite nicely, actually.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. In the last session of the Scottish Parliament, this committee undertook an inquiry into the Scottish Government's China plan, and the inquiry report noted that criticisms have been made of the ability of business support agencies, particularly the SDI, to support Scottish businesses in China. Now, my question is, has the level of support provided by enterprise agencies, including the SDI, increased in the years since the publication of the previous committee's report? And are these agencies providing the support necessary to assist businesses in their efforts to trade with China?
I can only speak from our experience. I think in the last 5 years or so, I suppose, we've certainly felt that there's been a strong focus, a persistent and reliable focus on promotion of asset management. That fits, as I said earlier, with I think our feeling about what's the thing that we should be emphasising from the financial services perspective. And so I would say, you know, the answer is yes. There's been an increase in activity. We've had good support from, I mean, we're obviously talking about the devolved government here, but, you know, just speaking at that level, we've had good support from ministers and indeed from SDI. So it's been, you know, we've certainly found we've had a shared focus on that particular sector, and there's been a good series of events and interactions.
Thank you.
Dennis? Yep.
Yeah, I think I can't speak for SDI, obviously, but I do think the resources have increased significantly in the past 5 years, perhaps. And again, I could be shot down influenza. It could have doubled in China. And you know, again, I think the concern that I would have with that is that other markets, of course, have had to suffer as a result of that. If we look at Eastern Europe, which is a very much close at hand, growing and emerging economy of 100 million consumers, the only country with Poland that didn't go into recession, etc., etc. The resources haven't increased in that area at all. So I look at a neighbour close to us with a fantastic market opportunity, growing infrastructure needs that has not had that level of increase of support versus a China which is logistically very much further away and much more complex, but it has a significant resource. The return on investment from that has always been, it's a long-term plan. And we just mentioned that the China plan here is a short-term plan, and the targets in here are short-term, and they have not been met. But they always, when that gets challenged, we do keep on hearing, well, China is a long-term investment. You know? And I don't quarrel with that, it's absolutely true. But then we shouldn't have a plan that says we're going to get results in the short term. And then why are we not looking at Eastern Europe, and why don't we not have a strategy for dealing with Eastern Europe that is every bit as robust as the one that we have for China?
Well, I take the point you make, but I mean, I think you said earlier on that the Scottish performance has left a bit to be desired, and yet you're saying now that the support has increased. So in that case, are you saying that it's the actual business's fault that we're not doing well?
No, I'm not actually assigning blame. I'm just actually trying to underline the observation that the performance has gone nowhere, and yet the resource, the input, has gone up. Now, yes, you could draw a number of conclusions.
That seems a bit of a paradox to me.
One way out of that paradox is to say the support hasn't been effective. Yeah. You know, that's another way of doing it. Now, it's far from me to draw that conclusion, but we know the support has gone up significantly, and yet we know the export performance has gone nowhere. So, you know, I think it's for the committee and others to draw or to answer the why of that. I have an opinion, but that would just be an opinion, because I think it's such a difficult market, and that you know, if you want to again, if you don't mind a little bit of humour, you know, if you would like to look around for a brick wall to bang your head against, you know, it's kind of like what we're doing now. It's very difficult, and because it is a long-term process. Again, you know, I do want to emphasize that I absolutely agree we have to be in China. We have to grow relationships with China. You know, that's not in question, but I'm talking about the economic performance and the return on investment that we're getting from that. I think has to be understood as to why it's so low.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd just like to address the point about whether China is a long-term market or not, and just think a bit about whether that notion is actually a bit out of date. China has been described as a long-term market when you were talking about high-involvement products, capital equipment, turnkey plants, and this type of stuff. But if you look at the acceleration in business success for companies selling food, you know, the example of salmon and things, this has just been over the past couple of years. And China can work crazily slow, but it can work crazily fast on some food products or luxury products. The demand is now, and they want it now. They're not interested in negotiating for years about it. And they want it now because the market exists there now. So I do think it is a changing environment in China where there's always the long-term relationship for some projects. But for the products and solutions that Scotland has now, I think there's a much shorter business negotiation time and a much more bigger likelihood of success. So I do think it is changing in that regard, which should make us feel that we have to be ready with teams on the ground to help companies access these more immediate opportunities.
I
think there are huge opportunities, and I think particularly in the financial sector and particularly in asset management, and I'd be very surprised if in five years, at the moment they're just beginning to look out, but we would hopefully be managing quite a bit of money, from mainland China.
I think, yeah. Why don't you come in now, Dennis? And I've got a couple of members who want to come in with questions too.
Sorry, just one point about opportunities and the value of these opportunities. I think from an economic point of view, it's important to ask ourselves what's the value add to Scotland in these opportunities. For example, in whisky, we talk quite a lot about the growth in the export market of whisky. Well, a doubling in exports of whisky doesn't result in a double of employment in Scotland. In fact, it's quite a weak relationship between that. So we can look at numbers and we see huge growth, but it doesn't actually result in much economic gain. I'm not sure about the financial markets, but I would imagine there's a similar relationship there. We can see great gains in financial services in terms of the apparent gain from trade to China and Asia, but how much does that actually result in economic gain here in Scotland? So in some of these areas where we have been successful, I don't think there has actually been a value that comes back to Scotland. So I do think that has to be factored in to the evaluation of these plans.
Hansala.
Yeah, Dennis, you make an interesting point, and I'm just wondering, is it too much emphasis is placed on the China market for too little return? Compared to other opportunities, perhaps in the Middle East or South Asia?
Absolutely. I mean, again, to put it in perspective, some of the data that I presented to you, the written evidence, in the past 4 or 5 years, the exports to China have been at a similar level to the United Arab Emirates. Now, if we look at the Middle East as a region, I don't actually have the data for the Middle East, but there's no doubt that the exports to the Middle East are significantly higher than to China. And we've got fantastic relationships with there. Eastern Europe, emerging Europe. I sometimes see from the press there just seems to be a problem with trading with Europe, and I can't really put my finger on it as to why we have a reticence to encourage and promote trading with Europe, in particular emerging Europe. And that, I suppose, is my overriding concern with the China plan, is that it diverts attention, I think, from fantastic opportunities that we have here in Europe. There's opportunities all over the world. The question should be for businesses, where can we get the biggest return in the shortest time? At the same time as strategically working on long-term relationships, such as China. But we should be saying, where can we get the biggest return? If the government has got £1 million to spend, if someone put £1 million on the table, where would we put that additional £1 million, £10 million, whatever the number is? It's just a bit artificial. But where would you put that right now to get the biggest return? And my concern is it might be China. But I don't think that would be the right answer in terms of getting the biggest return. And that's really what my challenge is to think through, where should we get the biggest return for a very small budget that we have.
Okay, thanks. I've got Willie, Coffey and then Rod.
Thanks, Convener. Just to follow on this theme with Dennis, not just because you're sitting beside me, Dennis, but you make some really interesting points. I'm looking at the data I think that you supplied in Poland, as you mentioned earlier, doesn't feature in the top 20 international export markets or destinations for Scottish goods and services in any of the past 10 years or so. So there's something in that. But I mean, while you're here, I think you have to take advantage of the contribution you're making, which I think is quite valuable to the committee. And you said the plan's the plan, but business will happen anyway. Even in the absence of a plan, we'll still do business with China. But what do you think? You were starting to get to the point. What do you think we need to do or needs to be done to actually improve the effectiveness of how we do business with China and get a bigger bang for our buck? What do we need to do?
You're kind of trapping me into giving some opinions for China, you know, and actually promoting China, but I'm actually trying to emphasise other markets. But you know, I'll take the question as it is. I think partly I tried to answer that earlier by saying it's focus. It's not spreading over the whole of China, but actually finding the way that we can get the biggest return. So it's not trying to win on all fronts. As an example,
do you mean all the sectors, all the different sectors?
Yeah, but what's the best sectors? And again, you know, people jump into whiskey, and whiskey probably is one of the best sectors from the top level revenue numbers, but it's probably not the best sector from a value add to the economy. So I think some work would need to be done to say which is the best sectors that will give the best value add. But there's also, strategically, there is an argument that actually focusing on Hong Kong would give us a bigger return, because that's a great bridge into China, and we've got excellent relationships with Hong Kong, fantastic expat community in Hong Kong, and perhaps putting more of our eggs in the Hong Kong basket might give a bigger return. So I think I would look at those types of things, Willie.
And convener, I mentioned the direct air routes in the first panel, and Mr. Tulloch also mentioned that as being a particularly great opportunity for us. Would you agree with that, Dennis Taylor, that if Scotland had direct links straight to Glasgow or Edinburgh with China, would that assist this process of improvement?
Direct and low cost links. Yeah, I mean you can jump into Eastern Europe £30, and for a business they spend £50, they're doing a business deal in Eastern Europe and they're back the next day. You know, so the risks of logistics are relatively low. China, if you can reduce the risks and the costs, the time out, and make it a more efficient transaction for the businesses, then you're going to improve the opportunities for them, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, Campbell?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow that on. We've heard a lot about opportunities. We have heard about difficulties in China. I'd like to just explore how we can tackle some of those difficulties apart from the air link, which obviously has been mentioned. Anybody else on the panel got a view on tackling the difficulties and improving things?
I think my colleague Giles mentioned earlier business incubation as a possible soft landing for Scottish companies, which can decrease some of the risk that was mentioned, and offer a model where they can go in with a far smaller amount of risk into the market and pull out if after serious consideration of the market and scouting of the market potential they find that there isn't a market, then they can pull out with less, having spent less resources on it. That would be one.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just in terms of Dennis's opinion on the China market, I think China market is a market that we can't ignore, and I think I would agree that it's a long-term market rather than a short-term market, because the volume cannot be ignored. So I think they quite clearly are going to be an important element for our trade. However, I wanted to actually say that can an increase in exports value to the economy really be attributed to the China plan, and if not, why not?
Yep.
It's for everybody, yes.
Well, we haven't had an increase.
No, from the China plan, from the start to now, we've had exports, so we've had an increase in our trade with China.
I don't believe so. Not as a result.
We were given figures by about 2 million of an increase.
2 million?
Yeah.
2
this
million.
Morning we were given that figure from 2 to 4
It goes
million?
up, it bobs up and down, and depending
sure
on
it
which
does.
year you take it, but overall it's flat. And again, if you look at the currency exchange, where the yuan is devalued by 40%, or the pound is devalued by 40%, you're actually looking at Scotland's as importers. If you're standing in China today and looking at imports from Scotland, they have gone down in Chinese currency terms. So there has not been an increase.
Do you think that Claire wanted to come in, and I think Mr. Anderson wanted to come in, and Angus and Owen, is that right? Yeah.
I've actually got a different point. Convener, if you wanted to keep going with that one, or...
No,
a different question.
Fire away.
It was really, I mean, we talked a lot today about the different barriers, about the competitiveness of the market, about the obstacles that because of the tariffs that are in place and things like that. But how much is the lack of knowledge of the culture and the language and just those basics impacting on particularly SMEs choosing or not to come forward? And as a supplementary to that, if we are really serious about this, have we done enough in terms of our education system in actually moving forward in teaching Chinese, but not only as a language learning, but ensuring that our STEM subjects have it included and that you know our finance students have that understanding through university.
If I can say that all the surveys done with China, with British companies, with foreign companies doing business in China, culture and language comes up regularly as being one of the main barriers. I mean, some of us around the table have studied Chinese, and we forget when we go to China how daunting it is for somebody to step off a plane and just be surrounded by symbols which they don't understand. Surrounded by people who are speaking a language they don't understand, and despite people saying there's lots of Chinese who speak English, there are, most likely either the person that you meet either won't speak English or they prefer not to. You know, they prefer to use an interpreter or something like that. So we shouldn't underestimate the huge challenge of culture and language. And I think going back to the point before about making companies more prepared of what to expect when they step off the plane, about in their medium to sort of long-term plans or even short-term plans, about hiring a Chinese employee to act as a bridge to help them understand these difficulties and make faster progress is really important. And your point about yes, in a world in which China will you know, things will gravitate towards China. I don't know whether we've got it right here, but it's absolutely vital that people coming through the school system have a greater understanding about China at various levels and in various contexts. So it removes this sense of alienness that China presents to us when we encounter it.
James has been desperate to get in for a while, and I'll come back to you.
I'm a bit disturbed, to be honest, in the tenor of some of the conversation, because whilst I would be the last person to suggest ignoring Poland or wherever else in Europe you're talking about, although I suspect the cultural differences are equally as great there as when you're talking about China, I do think that we're neglecting some really important factors here. You know, from a narrow point of view, we're interested in China because it's like the classic story of the bank robber. You go there because that's where the money is. But, you know, broaden that out. I think that it's highly probable that China will be the leading economy of the world for most of all our lifetimes, and people, more importantly, younger than most of us in this room. It is also the market in which increasingly you have to have the clearest competitive advantage to be a winner. Now, I think it is catastrophic if Scottish business walks away from that. It would have been like walking away from America 100 years ago. And I think that, you know, all the talk of failures, etc., this is the way you establish whether you're good at what you're doing. Can you compete in China, just as competing in America used to be? And, you know, I think Scotland is doomed unless we can do this. It doesn't mean you won't do the other things. You've got more chance of doing the other things if you can do this as well.
Okay, Owen?
I just wanted to, this is more of a personal response than anything based on member views particularly, but the question of education and should we be encouraging everybody to learn Chinese? I'm not the only person around the table who's spent 30 years odd trying to learn Chinese, but I do think it's important to keep in mind that it's a very difficult language, and where I think the UK and Scotland, as part of the UK at the moment anyway, where we lose out is the fact that we are monoglot, because in the time it takes to learn Chinese, one could become very proficient in Spanish, French and Italian, and that's true. I mean, that's the FCO's sort of rule of thumb, and I think that it's quite an attractive idea that we should sort of encourage everybody to learn Chinese. My own view is that we would be better in educating people about the recent history of China, because I think that is what, for the next few decades, is going to condition certainly the government's approach to many, many things, and we can see that in all sorts of aspects of the way China approaches foreign relations in particular at the moment. So my preference, my thought would be, rather than focusing on trying to get everybody at a sort of incredibly sort of basic level of Chinese, it would be educating people more about the recent history of China.
Angus Taylor.
I think Willy Brandt said, when you're selling and I'm buying, we speak German, but when you're buying and I'm selling, then we speak your language. And I do think it is important, the languages, and I think the focus in schools on French and German purely because people have been trained to teach French and German, and it's completely wrong. And we should be teaching people much more to speak Spanish and Chinese. But I agree that the cultural aspect and also the history, I think anyone who goes into China and doesn't understand the damage that we did, during the Opium Wars, and regrettably very much, Scots were to the forefront of that as well. I think that's very important as well. So the idea you have in one of your reports that one should talk about human rights, during business meetings, I think it's going to be extremely counterproductive.
Okay, I think we've exhausted our questions actually for today. If there's any other members around the table who think they've missed anything, then please let me know now.
Chair, I'd asked if anybody had any examples of SDI or others actually supporting companies overseas. Has anybody actually come across success in that way, that someone's actually received some support and they've then gone on to actually be successful and engaging in China, if anybody's had that experience at all?
On?
It's not quite the answer you're probably looking for, but I won't mention company names, but there certainly has been support from the Scottish Government and UK governments in dealing with particular regulatory issues for companies that I've been involved with, and that has been very valuable. It's not quite the same as, sort of arranging for somebody to go out and then enter the market for the first time, but I do think, again, and I echo very much what James was saying earlier, you can overstate it a bit, but, China is a market where, occasionally and in the right setting and picking the right horse for the right conditions, it's very useful to have support from government and its agencies.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable point, because when we visited the Scottish Salmon Company, one of the things that they needed support with was the quality stamp. And that was one of the things that I think SDI had helped them with, was to get that quality stamp, so that it meant it ease of access and quickness access, obviously, for the freshness issue of getting the product to market. I think, Jamie, you were very interested in that and took forward some question on that line.
For a point of clarification, I know that one reason that the exports might have been down in 2012 was because the Scottish salmon production, or exports, fell hugely to China because of the amoebic gill disease, because China likes to take bigger fish, and all the fish had to be harvested at a lower weight. And that's why there was, Marine Harvest, for example, exported hardly anything to China, and normally is probably the biggest salmon exporter there is. So that's one point. The second point was that, referring to what Owen Kelly said about learning the language, I also know from Marine Harvest that they had to completely change the word marine, because there was no such word in Chinese which could possibly encompass what that meant. So they had to, I can't remember what word they used, but it was something completely different. And I think that is where the advice of, is frightfully important to people trying to do business on the cultural side, that sort of advice. Convener, did you say you were drawing the questions completely to an end now?
Yeah.
Could I ask one more question?
Of course you can.
A report issued by Pivot Capital Management states that the Chinese government understates their debt by almost 40%. Will the strategy of the China plan be sufficiently flexible to adapt if priorities are unachievable due to market fluctuations?
Who knows?
I believe it's set for an annual review, which is quite flexible.
Well, for what it's worth, my short answer to that would be yes, for the reasons we've discussed. It's proportionate. It's not, the resources are not massive. So if you were facing that kind of very, very significant market change, then my short answer would be yes, it is.
Willie Coffey.
Convener, we've heard some fairly contrasting views and opinions and so on, and particularly references to the data about Scotland's export values. Is there any comparative data for us to show us who China does business with, so we can maybe test some of the assertions and so on? Because that would be very interesting for us to see, and I'm sure colleagues would be interested to see that from the Chinese perspective, who they do business with over the last few years. That would be interesting for us.
Sure, that's something we could pursue. Yeah, the clerks are nodding. So, Angus Tull.
Just a very brief thing. I think the plan focuses too much on trade and manufacturers and not enough in servicing. I mean, Baillie Gifford, I think you employ 700 people in Edinburgh, and we employ 120. It's quite significant.
That's a point we should pick up on as well for our forward work. Can I thank you all? I think it's been a very, very interesting round table this morning. I think the contrasting views have been extremely enlightening and hopefully have led to lines of questioning that we can expand a bit on. If there's anything you think that when you go away from committee that you can offer us by way of interpretation or explanation, then we would very greatly appreciate that. And from my point of view, I think this has been a very, very helpful round table, and we look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to a quick comfort break. I think I'm going to suspend just for a few minutes for a quick comfort break, so if you could take a few minutes and get yourself back in your seat. Good morning and welcome back after a brief recess. And before moving on to agenda item 3, can I take the opportunity to welcome to our public gallery today the Speaker of the House of Keys, the Honourable Stephen Charles Rodden, SHK, and a delegation of 7 members. And I think we have Alfred Cannon, Geoffrey Corkish, Howard Quayle, Richard Ronan, Leonard Singer, Lawrence Skelly, Mrs Kate Beecroft and Mrs Joan Corkish. Welcome from the Tynwald Parliament in the Isle of Man. Is that correct? Yeah. So welcome, Speaker. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the rest of our deliberations for today. We're moving on to our budget strategy phase, so always something that's interesting for all of us in managing the pennies, and hopefully the pounds may look after themselves. So agenda item 3, as I said, is consideration of the committee's response to the Finance Committee on the budget strategy phase. If I can refer members to paper number 4, which is in your papers, entitled Response to Finance Committee on the Budget Strategy Phase. And if there's any comments or questions on the paper? No? No. There's a couple of specific committee considerations that we should look at. Some of the major events coming up, this being the Year of Natural Scotland, next year being the Year of Homecoming, and then we have international development, international strategies and international image and fresh talent to look at as well. So we are invited to consider and agree which the areas listed that I've just listed, and look for updates from the Scottish Government. Are committee members happy to pursue that line?
Agreed.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I think we agreed on that one. Moving on to agenda item 4, which is some feedback from myself in relation to the European Committee Chairs meeting, which was in Cardiff on Monday. We all take a turn at chairing it, so it was Wales's turn on Monday, and we had a very interesting conversation. Jenny accompanied you. Thank you very much for your support and taking some notes, because it was a very varied and interesting conversation, chaired by David Melding, who is the Deputy Presiding Officer and the Chair of the Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Committee. They don't have a European committee as such, but it sits within that format. We had an overview of all the committee's work from the committee chairs, with some common themes across Scotland, Ireland and Wales on common fisheries policy, the common agricultural policy, and some of the challenges around about subsidiarity and proportionality on how we're dealing with, for instance, transposition of some directives. We had a very in-depth conversation about the balance of competencies review and the UK's status in the EU, and the UK's have intimated that they may opt out and withdraw and bring back some of these key treaties, and understanding that there is some concerns about that, given we have a different legal system in Scotland. I had concerns about how that would pan out across our legal system, should there be any changes. There was a discussion about withdrawing from the Human Rights Act and the impact that would then have, given that the Scotland Act in Scotland, the Human Rights Act is intrinsic to that. So a very, very interesting conversation there. I think we are doing some follow-up work on that with the committee. The House of Lords Committee in particular are very exercised about this and doing their own inquiry. So I think we agreed, the 3 devolved groups there agreed to feed into that system. So hopefully the clerks are doing some work on that now, and we'll bring that back at a later date for our committee to then feed into the Lords Committee and open that communication route up as a two-way street. That led on to the UK Justice and Home Affairs opt-out decision, which again, sort of ran in parallel with the balance of competencies conversation, in as much as, again, the human rights opt-outs and some of the challenges and concerns around that. one of the big concerns was that the UK ministers had not provided a list of actual opt-out proposals, so it's hard to know what you're dealing with if they're not going to tell us. And I think even the House of Lords and the House of Commons committee have had real difficulty in pinning down their own ministers and their own government there to give them that list. So again, it's a difficult one, but one that I think we all agreed as committee chairs to pursue. The Justice Committee in Scotland were particularly thanked for some of the work that they had done in helping this along, and I think we were in agreement to have some conversations with the Justice Committee at a later date on how we would take some of that forward. The Justice Committee in the Scottish Parliament have actually written to the House of Lords, but they are still awaiting the UK Government's response as well to have a fuller conversation about it. The House of Commons Committee is currently doing an EU scrutiny system inquiry, so they're scrutinising the scrutiny of the committee. Sounds a bit Monty Python, but I think they're looking at the way that the systems work for them and whether they're actually doing what they should be doing, which I think would be quite interesting to see how that then we can learn from that. We did talk about some subsidiarity, proportionality, and I think we had 3 episodes, and 2 were proportionality and the other one was a subsidiarity issue that which the committee, I think it was Rural Committee, decided not to pursue. Was it energy? It was infrastructure, yeah. Decided no further action. We also had a very robust conversation about the constitutional debate in Scotland and how that will have an impact on the work of the other devolved administrations and obviously the House of Lords and the House of Commons Committee, and we agreed to have a very open conversation about that, given that this committee will scrutinise the part of the referendum bill that suggests how Scotland should interact with the EU and with foreign affairs and with home affairs and international development. So an avenue of conversation opened up there as well. So really that's a quick overview because it was a very robust and interesting conversation. We then, as a group, took part in the Constitutional Affairs Committee, and matters again turned very quickly to the constitutional situation in Scotland and the debate that's going on about Scotland's future. I found people were very interested, committee chairs were very interested in what's happening in Scotland. I didn't sense any negativity at all, just a keen interest and a keen request to understand what it means for the rest of the UK. So, any questions? Claire?
Yes, Convener, I was wondering if you intended also to write to the House of Lords and to the Minister at Westminster expressing this committee's concerns, because I think that, you know, adding weight to the concerns that have been raised from many sectors in Scotland, I think would be of value, and I was just wondering if you considered doing that.
Yeah, the three devolved, David Melding from Wales and Mike Nesbitt from Northern Ireland, I think we all agreed to, because we felt that would be supportive of the House of Lords inquiry to do that and write and ask for clarification and points of understanding, especially if we're talking about opt-outs and issues like that, then it would be quite nice to find out what we're opting out from. Thank you. Okay, Jamie?
Is there any way we can see a record of the deliberations that took place?
Was the informal committee meeting recorded? Was that? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. There is a paper that Jenny has done for me, which is just 2 pages of bullet points. I certainly could circulate that to the committee and it would help you understand the points that were drawn up, but we don't have a verbatim minute.
So it was a quiet meeting, I mean a private meeting, should I just say?
Yeah, the European Committee's chair is always a private meeting, and I think the informal committee in the afternoon, they didn't record it, but certainly happy to share any of this information and answer any questions that you've got. Yeah? Okay. I'll just circulate that. Yeah. Any more questions?
It's actually, Chair, that's a very good point, because I think the fact that the chairs make such a big effort, I think it's nice to just share that with the various committees. I think it's a very good idea to do that in the future.
Okay, yeah, it's something that happens every 6 months anyway, and
yeah.
We've hosted it here, and the next one I think is the House of Commons, and then the House of Lords. So the next 2 meetings pre-referendum will be at Westminster or the House of Lords. Okay? Yeah. If there's any questions or anything, you know, that you think you want to know about, let me know. Okay. Happy to move on?
Yep.
Yep. To the Brussels Bulletin, which again has been provided by Scotland Europa. If I could just have comments and questions on the Brussels Bulletin, and maybe a wee bit of feedback for Katie about how we're feeding back on the last version. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Willie.
Thanks very much, Convener. 2 weeks ago we were expressing our worry and concern about the situation between Serbia and Kosovo, and mercifully I think there's been at least a resolution to that provides us with some great encouragement for the future, sufficient enough for the European Union to decide to begin to discuss matters about Serbia's accession to the European Union, which I think is very encouraging. Scotland, we've got a particularly strong relationship, I think, with both Serbia and Kosovo, and we've received delegations over the past couple of years to this Parliament to talk to us about issues that are mentioned within the Brussels Bulletin report here, issues about promoting administrative capacities. It doesn't sound particularly exciting, but it's absolutely crucial and fundamental to the development of these two countries and how they move forward. They were particularly interested in scrutiny and accountability and how we hold our governments and various bodies to account. These skills and powers have been sadly lacking in these two countries for a number of years for some obvious reasons, and it's these areas where they need help, I think, from other member states and countries and partners that have long experience in this. My experience as a member of the Public Audit Committee, Convener, was that these were directly of interest to these countries where we could help, but I was never quite sure of the model and the mechanism that we could make that such an offer. I think it's really important for countries like Serbia and Kosovo to be able to reach out and get this kind of help, whether from Scotland or other members of the European Union. So I'd like to just put that down as a marker, Convener, if we could do something and take some advice on that. I think looking to the future, it's very positive that the European Union is now asking other member states to now recognise Kosovo, and some of them don't yet at the moment. But that stretches beyond member states to other institutions. For example, in a small example, but nevertheless an important one, Kosovo is not yet permitted to take part in international football matches. FIFA don't recognise them as an independent country and their ability to compete at a soccer match or a football match. And these may be small issues, but they're very important to people who live in countries like Kosovo. And while Scotland had a wonderful reception from Serbia, if a poor result over the last few weeks, I think it's important that we make progress and try to support these countries in the journey that they're now travelling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the strengths of having Katie on the committee now is she's got some experience of all the Balkans area when she was in the Commission. And one of the things that we discussed last week in a forward work programme is an evidence session in the autumn to look specifically at Kosovo, which I think would be very valuable to the committee given the interest that we've all got in this situation developing. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, the more interest we take in supporting our friends and neighbours, the better it is for Scotland and Europe as well. So a small paper will be coming forward to committee anyway to discuss how we take forward just a sort of a mini inquiry or a mini evidence session on how we can find out what's happening in Kosovo and how we can facilitate some of the very reasonable things that you've spoken about, because it's not just, you know, the football. I think maybe there'll be issues around about the European Athletics Championships, and you know there'll be a lot of cultural, educational and sporting things that maybe we could help facilitate given our great experience at losing at football. Jamie?
I think the bulletin's fine, it's good. But there's the omission I noticed under the fisheries section. The ongoing row with Iceland over the mackerel and herring issue, over which there were meant to be sanctions, and in the past it's been reported usually, and there doesn't seem to be any report on
on what is happening, because this is a really vital issue to our pelagic fishermen in the northeast. I just wondered if we could maybe get an update on what the position is, if possible.
Katie's just whispering in my ear. She's going to come back with you with an in-depth briefing on the situation. But maybe for your interest, when I... No. I met the ambassador, the UK ambassador to Iceland at the last Consular Corps event that I was at 2 weeks ago, and he was on his way the next day to Peterhead to speak to the actual trawlers to see if there's a way of resolving this situation. He asked me how we should handle it, and I said, be frank, because they will with you. So I've not had an update on how that worked out, but I found that quite hopeful in the fact that he had came down from Reykjavik especially to go and speak to the actual trawler and their associations at Peterhead to see if they can resolve some of these issues. So hopefully that's
my memory, the last
time
we had a fisheries war with Iceland, we lost, I think.
Yeah. Same as at football. Claire.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to maybe seek some clarification and more information about the section on air quality. I noticed that in the press it has been noted that Scotland still has a significant problem in this area, with Glasgow being one of the top air quality concerns in the UK, and part of this suggests that it might actually be extended to sea-based pollutants. And given that we have our offshore industry off the coast of Scotland, and we also have a significant fleet, as well as imports and exports coming through our ports in Scotland, I just wondered if we could maybe have an analysis of what impact that possibly could have on Scotland, and specifically for a fishing fleet as well.
Yeah, I think, indications we can do that. Thank you. Rod Campbell.
Yeah, just one small point in relation to the section on education targets. The targets for those aged 30 to 34. It says in the bulletin the UK has however not set a Europe 2020 education target with the Commission. Just wondered if we could investigate whether the UK government actually consulted the Scottish government about this little issue on education.
Yeah, we'll write to the relevant ministers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that everything on the... Oh, Hanzala.
Thank you, Chair. Just returning to Kosovo and other European countries which are facing difficulties, particularly in terms of democracy and how some of the leaderships have been chosen in Greece and Italy and other places, and these are serious concerns. Now, whilst I appreciate this is a dissolved matter for the government, nevertheless I still feel that we can still play a small role, and one of the ways we can maybe move forward is have friendship agreements and have friendly games, sporting activities, cultural activities to try and show that we actually share an interest with them, and also we share the hardship they're currently going through. That might open up other opportunities for them to do the same across Europe, and hopefully that will build confidence within the European Union to take this case up sooner rather than later. And I think it's a very positive way of moving forward. I would think that maybe we should look at our sporting agencies to see how they can support that activity.
Okay, Jimmy.
One point of clarification. I see Croatia is finally joining the EU on the 1st of July. Does that mean they will have to adopt the euro?
Yep.
They will be adopting the euro?
No, they won't be actually. They won't be. No, they don't. They won't have to adopt the euro. The conditions for entry into the euro is that a country has to satisfy all the criteria in the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism. I don't think Croatia has entered into that, but they certainly have intimated that for the time being they will not be adopting the euro.
Yes.
The same as Bulgaria, who have now decided that although it's used widely, I don't think there will be a formal adoption, and much like some of the other countries like Denmark.
Would they not have to, in order to be part of the eurozone, would they not eventually have to adopt the euro?
Well, entry into the ERM is voluntary. So a country volunteers to be in the ERM, and unless you're in the ERM, you can't be using the euro. So some countries can use unilaterally. Montenegro, for instance, unilaterally adopted using the euro, but don't have it as the central bank set up, and other countries in Europe have decided because of.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
That.
yeah.
Yes.
But there's no mechanism within any of the treaties to force countries to use the Eurozone currency. Claire.
Thank you. It was just a supplementary comment from Hanzala's point about sporting links, and he included Italy in one of the countries that it was concerned about. I just wanted to put on record my appreciation that the Six Nations have decided to keep the women's competition in the same frame as it has been in the past, because there was a talk about maybe having a two-tier system, which may have impacted on Italy as one of the sort of lowest performing in terms of the Six Nations in rugby, but nonetheless a very important sport for the country, and I'm very glad that that's happening.
Duly noted. Are we complete with the Brussels Bulletin? Is committee content?
Just one last point, Convener, and that is that I'm actually happy with the way the report's been presented to us, and I'm just hoping that we will continue to just follow this pattern. I don't think we really necessarily need to have a special meeting to discuss it unless there is some pressing issue that you think needs to be ironed out.
Okay, I think there's an email coming out anyway, so maybe we can explain it a bit better and can decide from there. Okay, committee content to ensure that other relevant committees get the Brussels Bulletin? Yep. Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6, which is a paper suggesting that your convener should be given permission by you, hopefully, to go to the Economic Ideas Forum, which is in June. Yeah, what's the date again? The 6th and the 7th of June in Helsinki. There is a number of high-level people being brought together, including the Prime Minister of Latvia, the Taoiseach from Ireland, and the Vice President of the European Commission, and a few others coming together to talk about some of the ideas and how we can formulate economic growth across Europe. And in some of the ideas that are up for discussion, European ESF funding, European structural funds, the Horizon 2020, the impact and the crisis in the Eurozone. These are all topics that are on the agenda, so hopefully with your agreement you will allow your convener to attend that conference.
Can I suggest an amendment to that, and that is that agree the convener attend the event, or the convener substitute, just in case for any reasons the convener can't go at the last minute, you would then be allowed a substitute.
Sure, we can find out if that's practical. Yep. Yep. Okay. So I just need to seek approval from the committee that funding be granted for that. Yeah. Agreed. Willie.
Yeah, totally support that, Convener. I just wanted to ask if the European Union per se has a China plan for Europe. Do we know that, and might that be something that's under discussion at this forum?
Next week. Yeah. Yep. Katie said we'll get something together for the papers for the next meeting.
Because we heard evidence here that China sometimes sees Europe as the entity with which it wishes to trade.
Yeah. We'll go get something for the next meeting.
Support your attendance.
Okay, is it agreement for Helsinki? Yep, thank you very much. And that moves us on to agenda item 7, which we agreed at the beginning of the meeting to take in private. So thank you very much.